Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Well, after a short gap, I continue my loose Baz Luhrmann theme by examining the three parts of the Red Curtain Trilogy. Of course, this time with the second part, with the more mainstream famous Romeo plus Juliet, with of course Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. Now, I suppose the thing to say at the off is, as much as I think Shakespeare should be a text that's constantly brought back and re-examined and used in different contexts and with different styles to it, because its relevance is universal, and I think you can use his language and the story construction in ways that are so relevant to themes of now, no matter where we are in the world and in history and whatever culture it is, it has a universality to it. In saying that, I personally am not the biggest fan of Romeo and Juliet. It's still a top tier Shakespeare. It is still within the top 10 of his greatest plays ever made. But personally, I appreciate the things that are phenomenal about it. There are certain plot beats that don't work for me as well as Macbeth or Othello or King Lear. That just, it's so fixated on the romance of it that there are certain plot elements and character elements that fall by the wayside that I would wish they'd expand upon. And so, in coming to this adaptation, the thing that I suppose I would want to bear in mind as I discuss it, before I discuss Baz Luhrmann's vision of it, is that the text and the story do have issues that can't be corrected because they are inherent to the core of what makes Romeo and Juliet. Now, saying that, what I do appreciate is that it is one of the most accessible texts. It's why they teach it in schools. It appeals to young people because it's about young people, and of course the themes of love and tragedy and death, and forbidden love, I suppose, are ones that even teenager could appreciate and understand, and allow them into the text. And I think that's, of course, something Baz Luhrmann is really trying to tap into. So I do appreciate it from that standpoint. In terms of what Baz is trying to do with this, it's interesting because I said with Strictly Ballroom that you can see the breadth of his ability, a demonstration of everything that he wants to do in his style, even though the film doesn't have the budget to realise his creative abilities, and yet it also early on demonstrates his bad habits. Now, I was thinking that these were habits that he then later drops for a bit. They might come up. I definitely know they come up in Moulin Rouge, and not so much in Great Gatsby, but they do rear their head now and then. And I thought Romeo and Juliet would be one of those films that doesn't allow Baz Luhrmann to indulge some of those elements that are stylistic, and they are choices. He actively makes them something he wants to do, and yet at the same time are somewhat distracting. So primarily, again, the opening of the film is so manic and almost comedic that it doesn't entirely fit with the pace and style of the rest of the film. I said that with Strictly Ballroom, with the talking head, faux mockumentary style that they did, that was almost like a comedy sketch. And with this feels like action movie parody opening. It opens with of course the television sequence, which has the newsreader saying the opening lines of the play, which I think is a really strong way to um, introduce the film. But then something which I had no recollection of, and frankly so threw me off that I genuinely thought we were watching a wrong copy, is it then repeats the text, but spoken by a different character over like an action movie style opening, where it cuts to different characters with their names across the screen, and then it cuts to Romeo and Mercutio and their gang of friends as they are encountering Tybalt and his gang, and sort of the conflicts of the Capulets and the Montagues sort of laid bare, and we can all see that. But the way it's presented almost feels like a parody of, say, a John Woo film. I genuinely started to think as I was watching it, going, what would a John Woo directed Shakespeare adaptation look like? And I feel like the whole of the film would look something a bit like this, or something like a Reservoir Dogs style. Again, it's got that, or maybe not Reservoir, maybe more like Pulp Fiction style, like over the top action, characters just being bombastic, almost smirking at the camera in the ways that they react, and there's just this shouting, but it's not even shouting, it's more loud proclamations, and it's very distracting, it's very hard to settle in. And from what I understand, that is a habit of Baz Luhrmann. He like I said, did it in Strictly Ballroom. He does it in Moulin Rouge, although I think that's the one place it works really well. I don't remember it being in Great Gatsby. I will confess, I don't think he does it there, and I've not seen Australia, but I understand he does do it there. And I understand, like I say, it's a stylistic thing, but it is odd, because then it takes a while to sort of settle into the film and go, well, what is this film? What sort of tone is it going to have? Is it going to have this, like I said, manic, aggressive, bombastic style to it throughout? Because I don't know if it's going to work with a text like Romeo and Juliet. It might have worked better with something else, with one of the more violent Shakespearean plays. But then it does settle down, or at least to some degree. It definitely does have stylistic flourishes that I really do love, and set pieces that are so just charismatic, I suppose. Just have this sense of something that's cool, visually arresting, colourful, full of character. It really does feel like a world that you actually want to step into, and I think that's very Baz Luhrmann. It's something so visceral that you physically want to touch the world itself, the text of the world. And again, I think this is, of course, the first, I'm fairly confident, the first collaboration between Leonardo DiCaprio and Baz Luhrmann. And this is a very early stage Leo. This is a pre-Titanic Leo. Of course, I think I said in a different video how I much prefer the older, more nuanced Leonardo DiCaprio, who does still do these wild performances, but he does them in a very methodical way, that even though it's the duck swimming thing, where it looks like he's doing something like Wolf of Wall Street or The Revenant as an actor with no effort, and yet the legs are kicking underneath the water. Whereas with this almost feels a bit like Leo is injecting the person who he is at the time, of course famously quite a party boy in this period, into this film. And that works. It does work because that sense of youth and aggression and wildness really fits the Romeo character, and of course makes it work in a contemporary setting. And the gang of his group of friends really do feel contemporary. Really do have that. Blazing round the streets in vehicles. Of course, they swapped rapiers out for guns, and it feels authentic. And again, it does fit that sense of, the whole... an interpretation of the Romeo character is one of impulsivity. And so it's hard that there are readings of the text that say that, his falling in love with Juliet is simply an impulse-driven series of events. And that if the tragedy had not happened and formed in the way that it had, the love aspect would have diminished, because this is the only way that the character of Romeo could have gone. In the same way that Romeo was in love with Rosamund before he was with Juliet. And it's a clear demonstration of someone who acts upon first impulse, first instinct, doesn't really have that sense of longevity to them, or at least doesn't demonstrate it. It's very much a in the moment kind of spirit. And like I say, the world is an interesting one. Setting it in contemporary San Diego, was it? Los Angeles? But that kind of American streets, the hot sun, the way that it really feels like the American equivalent of Verona. And it has that sense of sort of heat, and everyone's a little bit hot under the collar, which is why everyone's just that little bit overreactive and has that sort of Italian sense of hot tempers and quick reactions. And I really do think that parallels so well. And there are genuinely... I know to begin with I was critical of sort of the Romeo and Juliet text, but there are and Baz Luhrmann's style, but there are moments that are genuinely brilliant. That I think, for instance, Mercutio, and the way that he's introduced into the party, as this transvestite, over the top... really sort of brings the party to life, energy to him that to some degree will then Baz Luhrmann will use for Great Gatsby to create that sense of party in and Moulin Rouge similarly as well. And I do think he's very good at those kind of set pieces, and when Romeo and Juliet first encounter each other, and that whole sequence is just genuinely hypnotic, and the music's right. And of course, funny thing, again, not to keep drawing parallels, but the Moulin Rouge thing, it's interesting how is it called Say That You Love Me, the song that of course was the hit out of Romeo and Juliet. What's that? Loveful. You get 15 seconds of that song, if that, and that's it, and that's all you get, and that became a hit in the same way that Christina Aguilera's... what is the name of that song? Because all I know is Kichi Kichi Ya Ya Baby. I can't...
Lady Marmalade.
Mamie Marmalade, that's it. The way that Christina Aguilera's Mamie Marmalade just really became the hit of Moulin Rouge, even though, again, that plays an even smaller part in a montage of songs. But yeah, it's the fact that you get this hypnosis to the way that they encounter each other, and you do genuinely believe these two have instantly fallen for each other, and that they genuinely are engrossed in each other just immediately. And there is something quite hypnotic about it. And I do think genuinely Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes do have really good chemistry. Another criticism I would have of the film, if we're sort of... This feels very much like a Romeo plus Juliet film, at least from my perspective, where they give Leo... And again, this is more on the text, I suppose, than it is on the film. The film can only do so much. but it very much gives Leo a chance to flex his creative ability and to show all these different emotions and to really push himself as an actor, and Baz Luhrmann tries all these different styles of film around him, whereas Claire Danes as Juliet doesn't really have a lot to do. Like I said, the falling in love scene, every scene she has with Romeo is great. Their together scenes are fantastic. And I do think towards the end she does have a really good sequence, particularly when she's been told she's going to marry Paris. But there's a lot where she plays it more traditionally. The scenes between her and the nurse play it more like a traditional Shakespeare text, and there's nothing particularly stylized about some of those scenes, and so it loses something there because when Baz Luhrmann finds ways to lift the text into being something new and stylistic and suit the wildness of the world around it, and to recontextualize things in a contemporary setting, he really knocks it out of the park. And I said that really works with Leo, but with Claire Danes scenes, some of them genuinely, you could close your eyes and it feels like Claire Danes could be playing Juliet in a version set in the time period that the play was written. And so therefore she's not given a lot to kind of, and I don't think it's her fault. Claire Danes is a great actress with the right material or the right direction. It just feels like some of the scenes around her just don't have the same explosive energy to them. And again, perhaps that is a text thing. Who's to say, really? And it does have a really great supporting cast. I mean, Mercutio is probably the standout, and his death scene is just phenomenal. Honestly, from the death scene on, there is such a cool atmosphere, and Mercutio's death resonates in a way it doesn't always. In the text, his death sometimes just kind of happens. It's just a plot point to get Romeo to the next bit, whereas this definitely leans into that, and his death is so powerful. It's genuinely stirring, and of course Baz Luhrmann leans into the atmosphere with the lightning and the way that Leo performs his reactions. It's genuinely really quite great. And from that point on, you do have that sense of escalation, that the death of Tybalt. The way that Romeo is banished. From that point, the third act of this film, whereas I did think the third act of Strictly Ballroom had issues, and I think I levelled that at Baz Luhrmann generally, which I think, looking back at, is a bit unfair. I do think the third act of this is explosive in a way that I think this is a case where it works against the text, where I personally think the plot beats of the ending of Romeo and Juliet have problems. The nature of Shakespearean tragedy, of course, relies on the one event that could have prevented the tragedy, of course. So the example I always go to is Othello with the handkerchief. And, of course, the thing of Romeo and Juliet is the note, and if Romeo had gotten the note, all of this would have been prevented. And it's a plot beat that's frustrating because I don't know if the mechanics of it work quite as well, because it feels it feels almost arbitrary. It doesn't feel like this great dramatic tragedy that he didn't get the note in time. It just feels like, oh, he just missed out. In the same way, if he'd have waited just a little longer, she'd have woken. It doesn't resonate with me personally, because I feel like the mechanics of those sorts of elements don't work as well. They don't stir me in the same way as, say, the Othello ending or the Macbeth ending, where it genuinely builds to a climax that's just earth-shattering. And yet Baz Luhrmann finds a way to make... I mean, the moment from which Leo gets the news that Romeo gets the news that Juliet is dead, and the way that Baz Luhrmann builds this huge action-packed, and this is where the action and the bombast really fits. You know, there's this climactic ending where he drives into town and he's having shootouts with helicopters, and then he goes into her mausoleum, and it's just full of candles, and there's just a very cool atmosphere that's quite rapturing. It builds to a great climax, and the ending genuinely carries you through, because I do think this is such a good film, and I do think these modern adaptations are phenomenal. You know, with the right hands and the right stylistic director, you can take these texts and genuinely make them extraordinary even for modern audiences, and reinterpret them in ways that allow people to see things in them that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. Now, for me personally, my great modern reinterpretation is Ralph Fiennes' Coriolanus. I remember being quite young, maybe 18, 19, when I saw that, and I found that so stirring and such a great film. Or Michael Fassbender's Macbeth, I think, also really has such a style and atmosphere to it. But I have to credit this to Baz Luhrmann. I wish more auteur directors would take Shakespeare texts and put their own spin on them whilst maintaining the actual text itself. Because I would love to see some of those adaptations and how different directors would do that, but I suppose you can only get one every couple of years or so, because otherwise it becomes a bit of a cliche or a bit of a, this director's now doing an interpretation of Taming of the Shrew, or this director's doing an interpretation of A Winter's Tale, and I can understand why it's not one you can keep tapping into, but I would love to see more. Especially your out there directors. John Woo's Macbeth. That would be very interesting. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because that's all helped me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell, and do check out to get notifications of when new videos go up, and do check out my back catalogue of videos. Of course, I've already covered Strictly Ballroom, and I will some point within the next couple of days be covering Moulin Rouge. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about TV shows and movies, and I share these videos once they've been uploaded to YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Take care.